everybody, welcome to D&D in a Castle DM Deep Dive. I'm sitting here with the legendary Dungeon Master and many other things, Mark Meer. We have just wrapped our first ever D&D in a Castle USA here at the beautiful Mohican Castle, which we have just been extolling its virtues as a beautiful fantasy location. So, Mark, what just happened?
D&D in a Castle just happened for the very first time on American soil right here in Ohio.
And what happened for you and your 6 players?
I took them on a seafaring adventure, which culminated in gladiatorial combat aboard a cruise ship, for all intents and purposes. It was a lot of fun. I had a great group. I usually do. I'm usually quite happy with my players, and this bunch was particularly fun.
Awesome, awesome. And this is, I think we've all lost count of how many times you've been at D&D in a Castle.
Well over a dozen now, I think. Yeah.
Well over a dozen. And how did it compare being in the US versus being at Lumley Castle in the UK where our other events have taken place?
Well, I will say this. The castles over in the UK are, of course, very authentic and historical, because they were castles. But this really is a little more fantasy, a little more Dungeons and Dragons. So I think the US will offer castles that have been built by lovers of fantasy and lovers of castles, and so they'll be a little more storybook, a little more fictional.
Yeah, it's very elven here. We sort of cast it in our minds as an elven village, a little bit Rivendell-ish, a little bit festival, a little bit outside of so many trees around here. But you've been coming to D&D in a Castle for a long time. What is D&D in a Castle like as a DM? What's the experience like?
As a dungeon master, it's a great opportunity to have a stream of very enthusiastic players who buy in immediately. And the surroundings help them do that. It's very immersive. People come here to play, and they come to role play. It's like Dungeons and Dragons, but a heightened experience in every way. So if you play D&D, you've got the gist, but better.
So you've just finished a campaign here. You have 2 events coming up in the fall at Lumley Castle, and then those are basically sold out. There might be 1 seat, I have to check. But in the spring, you're going to have 2 tables, 2 games that you'll be doing at Lumley Castle in March, April. And what do you have planned for your players for those games?
Well, we spoke about it briefly before. It's going to be the same one that I just ran, so it'll be even more refined. It's called Aboard the Leatherback, and it's a nautical adventure. Your characters are going to start penniless in the yawning portal. Don't worry, you'll still have armor and weapons, but yeah, you're going to be a bit down on your luck, and an offer of employment will take you aboard the Leatherback and on the high seas.
Very cool. And in terms of your style of dungeon mastering, I know you have a lot of various talents, improvising, voice acting, in terms of D&D. What kind of approach do you take to dungeon mastering? What's your style like?
I would say it's sort of a theatrical style. I am a voice actor, so I tend to do voices. I'll do many voices. Sometimes I'll just be talking to myself, and the players will have to interrupt 2 NPCs. We're having a very in-depth conversation. Certainly, I like to have a bit of humor in my games. Sometimes I do like the scary stuff too, but it'll usually be leavened with a fair bit of humor. And more than that, their role play is what I really enjoy. And just seeing players get into their characters, incorporating some elements of their backstory, sometimes even on the fly. Like if I just discover a new thing about a character, I might be able to adjust things slightly so an element of their backstory can come into the picture. But that said, even though I do like role play, there will still be plenty of opportunity to roll dice in combat.
So lots of combat. I did hear a lot of very wild encounters of combat in your game.
Yeah, when you encounter combat in this particular adventure, yes, it will be, shall we say, spicy.
Yeah. Little spicy combat. I feel like your games are sort of, what I hear from your players, kind of a wild ride. Like Mark's going to take you on a wild adventure, and it's going to be fun, it's going to be over the top, there's going to be unexpected twists and turns, and things are going to be a little left of center. That's sort of what I hear.
Yes, off kilter, if you will.
Yes. And how did you get into dungeon mastering? What drew you to dungeon mastering?
I mean, I became a dungeon master because I wanted to keep playing Dungeons and Dragons.
That's a common theme.
The people that I started playing with were older kids, and so I loved Dungeons and Dragons right from the get-go and wanted to keep going, of course, ad infinitum. But people move away and people get other interests, and they were older than me, so they basically stopped playing or sort of trailed off. And I realized that if I ever wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons again in the small town that I grew up in, I would have to teach people how to play Dungeons and Dragons and then be the DM. And I was a forever DM for a while.
Right. And in terms of DMing at D&D in a castle, this sort of structure of having 3 solid days plus of gaming, is that something, the kind of gameplay that you grew up with, or was that sort of new to you at D&D in a castle?
The marathon sessions that I did would often happen on my birthday, because that's usually what I wanted for my birthday, was like, I just want to play D&D. So they would, start in the afternoon and stretch well into the evening or early morning. But this sort of 3-day experience, that's what I always dreamed of. I didn't think it was possible, but here we are. And more than that, I never really had a lot of minis and things like that as a kid. It was like largely, you don't really need them necessarily.
Nope.
But if you like toys like I do, it's nice to have them. So now that I have accumulated quite a collection of minis, and D&D in a Castle, of course, has like a big storehouse, generously donated by WizKids and others. Being able to use all those toys and the terrain and just all the bells and whistles to make it like a truly special D&D experience.
And how do you prepare for that kind of campaign? Because it's not a one-shot, and it's not, an ongoing campaign that stretches out for as long as the players are playing. How is it different to prepare for a game like that?
A lot more material. And of course, you might prepare a lot of material in a campaign, but you're usually working that over the course of months or even years. So this is a condensed campaign. And usually, I think most DMs, as well as me, have the characters level up a few times during the course of it. So it does feel like a little mini campaign. I think ultimately, the way I approach it is try to, aim for cliffhanger moments at the end of each day. You might not always hit them because, as soon as your plans encounter the players, everything goes out the window and the schedule of things can get mixed around. But I do think of it in terms of approaching it like it was a dramatic piece, like it was a play. And these are the acts that you see in the play.
Cool. And in terms of your players, have you noticed any common themes among your players?
Common themes?
At D&D in a Castle.
Well, let's see. People at my table, often there's at least 1 or 2 people who really bring the cosplay game. Like they actually have different outfits for every day. They have props, and we saw that this weekend, actually. So I'm always pleased to see that because I am much the same.
Cool. So who do you think would enjoy your game? If someone was looking at our roster and thinking, who would I like to play with? Now, your tables tend to sell out pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. You're quite well known for a lot of things.
Well, let me tell you, if you're a fan of certain video games, then you probably want to be at my table.
There was definitely a moment at the castle here when people realized, wait a minute, who is this that's in our castle, and got very, very excited, which was quite
some of the staff, yes.
Some of the staff.
It was very nice to meet them.
Yes. But in terms of as a DM, who would enjoy your game? If we're, that we want people to pick the game that they are going to love, who's going to love your game?
Those who enjoy being entertained. People who enjoy collaborative storytelling, and if you're into the improv and you like that, I think you'd like my table.
Very cool. In the time that you've been coming to D&D in a Castle, we've seen you've been here since 2019 was the first year that you came.
Yes, that's right.
So over those, it's now 2024. So you've been coming to this event. You've been DMing much longer than that, but at least in the lifetime of D&D in a Castle. Have you seen things change in the D&D community in terms of the players, the DMs, even just the growth of the community through the pandemic? Have things changed in D&D that you've seen?
I mean, if you're speaking to the community, it got bigger, much bigger. Of course, during the pandemic, people needed a way to reach out to each other, and suddenly everyone had downloaded Zoom, and pretty soon everyone had D&D Beyond and Roll20 or some other tabletop. And I know from personal experience that I played with friends that they hadn't played Dungeons and Dragons since the 80s. And people from overseas. Our dungeon master was in New Zealand. Most of the players were in the UK. I was in Canada, and we were playing twice a week during the pandemic. So it brought a lot of people back to the fold who hadn't, and then people who had never played before. I've had players at D&D in a Castle, as a matter of fact, who started playing D&D because they started watching actual plays like Black Dice Society and others during the pandemic. And then that led them to play D&D themselves. And as I say, it just expanded exponentially. It was already on a pretty steep upward climb, but I think the pandemic just really kicked it into overdrive.
In terms of the players at D&D in a Castle, I mean, you were here for 1 year before and 1 year after. Do you feel there's a change, or several years after? Do you feel there's a change in the players that you had the first year versus the players you've had more recently since the pandemic?
Seeing more first-time players, actually, yeah.
Very cool. And how do you balance that? Or how do you prepare a game or run a game with first-time or very new players and, you know, veteran players or returning players after decades of not being able to play? Just the different levels of players. Does that make a difference to your game at all?
Well, I mean, I think ultimately it would be familiarity with the rules. And we were playing, for example, 5th edition. So some people might not be familiar with 5th edition because the last time they played it was AD&D. Some people might not be familiar with the rules because they're learning it for the first time. But I think ultimately the rules are there as a guideline to help you tell a story and help you develop this narrative and have a good time with friends. So I never put that much focus on them. You know, if we need to stop and look up a rule, that is fine by me. And the really important thing is that everybody connects with each other and everybody feels that their character got a chance to have an arc and have a narrative about them.
Great. So would yours be a good table for newcomers? Would you be excited to have a newcomer?
I would.
Or would you be worried?
I am always honored to be someone's first Dungeon Master.
I feel like that's what I've heard from all the Dungeon Masters. In fact, sometimes they fight over the newcomers. They want to be the first person to run someone's game of D&D. We've had people who've said they read all the books, but they've never been able to play. So, because, you know, you need a group and you need a Dungeon Master.
This is true.
So what is it that you think draws people to D&D in a Castle specifically to have this vacation experience?
Again, it's the immersion. Just the idea of, and not only the immersion, but also the focus. Because if you're playing at home, you're gonna have your life there. You got stuff to deal with. There's laundry to be done, that sort of thing. When you come to an immersive place like this and like a 3-day, or well, actually 4 or 5 day vacation, you just get to play Dungeons and Dragons. I think, what was the old slogan? Eat, sleep, roll dice.
Eat, sleep, roll dice.
That's and that is what you do. Like, and of course, you know, in between, you chat to like-minded folks about Dungeons and Dragons, or you do any of the other activities like miniature painting or archery, falconry, all the sort of things that have been offered in the past.
What's the vibe like at D&D in a Castle? How would you describe it?
It's great. It's a lot of fun, and especially because I think a lot of the folks who are Dungeon Masters, we had made each other before, you know, D&D Live and various other events like that, conventions. But this has sort of had a core of people who keep coming back because the Dungeon Masters, they really enjoy it, and we also enjoy seeing each other and getting to hang out. And you see that as well with repeat guests, people who come back again and again, not just because it's Dungeons and Dragons, but also for the sense of community around the event. Right.
Do you have a lot of returning guests? Have you had guests come back?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I've seen people. I've actually had entire groups of people who play Dungeons and Dragons at home come here as a group, and then I get to be DM for them, and they've come back a couple of times.
And you mentioned the other Dungeon Masters. Have you played with or been Dungeon Mastered by any of the other DMs? You played in any of their games before?
Oh, yeah. Well, B-Dave, of course, was the Dungeon Master for Black Dice Society.
Right.
And that's still one of my favorite campaigns that I've ever got to play. I love Ravenloft, and when they were putting it together with Wizards of the Coast, because it was like an official show, B-Dave said I was one of the first people he called because he knew how much I loved Ravenloft. So.
Well, that sounds great. So if we could end our interview
Sure.
with an invitation, if you want to invite people to come to D&D in a Castle next spring, come and play in your game, and take us away.
I heartily encourage you to come to D&D in a Castle, spring 2025, at Lumley Castle. Wait, that's not Lumley Castle. It's another castle. It's also a nice castle. That will be Lumley Castle in the UK. That is, you have the dates.
It will be it will be March
That's right.
March 24th to 28th and March 30th to April 3rd. Yes, excellent. Come and play aboard the Leatherback enjoy a seafaring, rollicking adventure with Mark Meer. I don't guarantee that you won't get eaten by a shark, but I do guarantee that you will laugh hard and make amazing friends. And thank you, Mark, for meeting with us today and chatting with us about D&D in a Castle. We look forward to having you back at many, many more castles to come, and with lots of great players and friends to be made. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And the shark thing could happen.